Good evening. President is here. I'll request President to say a few words about the program and what is his expectations from the panelists. Mr. Anand Singhania.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pradeep. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you all today for the Zoom interaction, a panel discussion on the inflation outlook. First of all, let me, respected speakers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the IMT Chamber of Commerce, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's panel discussion on this very important topic of inflation, covering the impact of crude prices, the currency movements, and the crops output, the 3 C's. I'm sure the panel we have are going to touch upon all these 3 things, how it impacts each of us, from our businesses, from our food inflation, to oil prices, and etc. As you know, IMC is one of the foremost chambers, and we constantly engage in debates and matters of economic and commercial and social importance, so that we can collectively provide inputs to the government on policy matters. Such an important topic is inflation. In fact, in one of our first managing committee meetings, we took up the issue of inflation and the impact it has on industry. As you know, inflation impacts several areas, one of them being food inflation. This hurts the poor the hardest. Inflation raises concerns among policymakers and encourages the Central Bank of India, which central banks, in our case the RBI, to pursue a tighter monetary policy. Reduced liquidity and cost in money hurts the top line and the bottom line of businesses. As a result, the MSMEs and the SMEs in our economy tend to suffer. Further, international crude prices, we are seeing the Ukraine war, and that has had a big impact on crude prices. In fact, Europe is struggling to meet the inflation is record highs because of rising crude prices. They have a strong bearing on the economic output of a country. And India today still has a very large dependence on oil. We are trying to move towards a green economy, but till that time, we still do have a very large impact of oil. As a universal intermediate, crude oil is a critical input that fuels economic activity. In our case, the massive import dependence makes the economy vulnerable to international price volatility. Further, the domestic agricultural output also has a direct correlationship on inflation. When the production is high, the water is good, the output is high, the prices are under control, whereas conversely, it may not be the case. So tracking the developments in the agriculture sector is very important, including the international markets. Further, the impact of the currency. The currency has a very big impact, since we talked about crude, which is imported. We are doing exports. So the impact on the foreign currency is also very important, which has an impact on price trends. So, as I mentioned, the 3 C's, crude, crops, and currency, they form a very potent combination to impact inflation for our policymakers. Containing inflation through appropriate fiscal, monetary, and administrative policies have always been a priority. According to a Business Standard article very recently on September 14, the WPI base inflation rate for August deaccelerated for the 3rd consecutive month to an 11th month low of 12.4%, as a pricing pressure from manufactured and fuel items eased despite an increase in food inflation. Data by the industry department showed food inflation accelerating to 12.3% in the month of August, as prices of wheat, vegetable, fruits, and protein-rich items shot up compared to their level a year ago. I could go on with stats, but I will leave it to our expert speakers, who will share not only the statistics, but how it really impacts all of us. So we have assembled a very good panel of experts to crystal gaze into the 3 critical markets, as well as other drivers of inflation. A very warm welcome and a special thanks to our speakers, Mr. G. Chandrasekhar, our Economic Advisor, IMC, and Director, IMC ARTF. Mr. Sundareshan Raghunath, former President, Oil Division by Fugra, India. Mr. Madan Sabnavis, Chief Economist, Bank of Baroda. Mr. Rohit Jetra, the Senior Executive Vice President and Business Head Forex for Kotak Mahindra Bank Treasury, and our very own moderator, Mr. Ramnath Pradeep, who's the founder and partner of Crash Capital Advisors. Let's get the insight from our experts. Where is the crude oil headed? Will the rupee weaken or strengthen? What are our crop prospects? What are our market dynamics and outlooks for the coming months? How this outlook will impact inflation? So before I conclude, let me quickly mention about IMC. IMC is a premier chamber of commerce. It's been around since 1907. We just celebrated our 115th foundation day. We have about 5,000 members and 150 trade associations who are our associate members, and through which we have a collective reach of about 400,000 members across various trade bodies, various places from trade, industry to services. And we have various expert committees. We have one on economic policy, we have one on industry, we have on banking, and so on and so forth. And each of these, ideate on the latest and the most topical topics and bring out white papers and reach out to governments to sensitize them. Already in the last couple of months, I must share that we have made several representations, and one of them was recently accepted by the Commerce and the Export Exim market on the ECGC cover and the lower factoring costs for exporters. So the Chamber is now a cradle for nurturing young talent and promoting emancipation of women through its Young Leaders Forum and Ladies Wing, which has become an embodiment of youth, entrepreneurship, positivism, proactive, and movement for women empowerment and entrepreneurship. I've chosen Partnering for Growth as my theme, and I see a lot of synergies where we have such a diverse panel. With this, I welcome you all to this very thought-provoking session. Thank you so much. Over to our moderator, Mr. Ramnath Pradeep.
Thank you, President, for your kind words, highlighting today's importance of the committee, as well as setting the agenda for the today discussions. And I once again extend warm welcome to Vice President, Mr. Somaiya, Ajit Mulgaonkar, Mr. DG, and Sanjay Mehta, Chairman and Co-Chairman of the committees, various expert committees and its members, other industry representative and other official of the IMC, Mr. Atul Joshi, Chairman of this committee, and distinguished panelists for today deliberation discussions, and on the inflation outlook covering the 3 C's. I'm delighted to participate in this discussion, and I look forward to this forum emerging as a leading platform for thoughtful discussion on contemporary economic and policy issues. The discussions are very important on the issue of inflation, which is impacting every citizen of the country from the poor to rich. I am also sure the panelists' insight on the topic will enhance the understanding of the current and future scenario. I now propose to focus on the matter which is now everyone's mind, ranging from the general public to the policymaker in India and across the world: inflation, crop, currency, and crude. Now, one of the agenda is that economic policy, how it is going. So our friend Mr. Sabnavis, he will be talking on. So today the global economy is going through a extremely uncertain period amidst the simultaneous interplay of the various headwinds lingering Ukraine-Russia war. We thought that Russia war will end maybe another 2-3 months, but it is lingering for a long time and impacting the whole world economy. The sharp rise in the energy and other commodity prices stand in the global supply chain and worsening food security. In several economics, inflation is ruling as a level not seen by the present generation, inflation is running well above the target of for a prolonged period and threatening to unhinge inflation expectations. Central bank world over and our RBI has no exception have begun delivering bigger and quicker policy rates hike to restore price stability. Yesterday, the Fed has also again increased the rate by 75 basis points. The sharply tightening financial condition due to the ongoing monetary policy normalization on the one hand and the persisting geopolitical tension on the other hand pose a significant downside risk to near-term global economic prospect. The development set in the motion that process towards the formal adoption of the flexible inflation targeting framework for the monetary policy in June 2016. What followed was a period of low and stable inflation till COVID shocks. The average CPI inflation between September 2016 and February 2022 was almost around 3.9 and was closely aligned with the inflation target of 4%. I am talking in terms of the India, our own country. And accordingly, the RBI set the inflation target between 4 to 6%. In the following period, that is from December 22 to April 21, inflation moved closer to the target around 4%. The easing of inflationary pressure, however, was short-lived as India experienced a devastating second wave of COVID during April-June 2021, which triggered localized lockdown, renewed supply chain disruption, and rising retail margin. This pushed inflation to about 6% during March to June 21. Now it is almost about 7%. The inflation pressure was reinforced by adverse pullover from the rising global commodity prices. The history of inflation in India since independence reveals that the incidence of high and volatile inflation mainly emanated from the drought, war, trend in the minimum. All these things have been faced by the India. Support price, global crude oil price, which presently we are facing, large fiscal deficit and their monetization. Sharp exchange of India economy did not encounter episode of hyperinflation, but continued to rise to 7%. Now I would like to deal with the three C's, and I would like to invite our esteemed panelist guest, Mr. Chandrasekhar, who will debate on the crop. Sundaresan Raghunath will dwell upon the crude. Mr. Rohit Jetra will delve upon the currency, and Madan Sabnafsis on the economic policy and the micro outlook. Now, I would like to introduce by our what is the name? Her lady.
Selfie.
Sorry. Selfie, yeah. You please introduce each one of, because you have got all the details with you.
Yeah.
And then we can take forward one by one.
So I welcome our esteemed panelists to join this panel, Mr. G. Chandrasekhar, Economic Advisor, IMC and Director, IMC ERTF Crops, Mr. Sundaresan Raghunath, former President, Oil Division, Trafigura, India, Crude, Mr. Rohit Jetra, Senior Executive Vice President and Business Head, FX, Consumer and Corporate Verticals, Kotak Mahindra Bank, Treasury Currency, and Mr. Madan Sabnafis, Chief Economist, Bank of Baroda, Economic Policy and Macro Outlook. To kindly join this panel, which is being moderated by Mr. Ramnath Pradeep, founder and partner, CRRAS Capital Advisors. So now I hand it over to you, Mr. Pradeep.
Thank you, Selvi. My earnest request to all the panelists is that the time restrictions are there, because the total time allotted earlier, there was three panelists, now 4 panelists. So the time allotted is 10 minutes. My earnest request to all the panelists, please adhere to the time schedule, so that there is also 15 minutes for question answer. So at the end, we will take a question answer for 15 minutes from I am told there are 55 participants who are participating, and they will have certainly a lot of questions. So I now would like to invite Mr. G. Chandrasekhar, Economic Advisor, IMC, to dwell upon how our daily consumption of the food grains, vegetable, fruits are impacted by the inflation, and what are your suggestions? I would request all panelists that please put your suggestions so that we can take up the matter with the RBI or whosoever the regulatory authority suitably, because IMC has been one of the organization who has been taking from time to time any suggestions coming from the expert committee as well as from the panelists whosoever has come and spoken about any subject matter. And fortunately, we have been getting very good positive response from the government and the regulatory body. So I request that whatever the other suggestion you have, either you can share with us, or during this or a later part also that can be shared, so that the consolidated view can be taken and we can take up the matter with the RBI and SEBI or whosoever is the relevant authority. So Mr. Chandrasekhar, over to you now.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for giving me this opportunity. Allow me a moment to share screen. Selby, you need to allow me to share screen.
Just a minute, sir.
And let me mention in
Yes,
the meanwhile that about 5 years ago we conceived of this idea of conducting this event on a regular basis because of inflation concerns, and we believe there are three critical drivers of inflation in India: crops, crude, and currency. And therefore, we thought 3 C's and inflation outlook is the theme that we've been following. Our friend Madan Sabnavis has been an integral part of these events. Raghu also had participated on a number of occasions. This is very interesting, and this becomes policy input for the government of India and, of course, for the Reserve Bank from a monetary policy perspective. Before I start, I want to highlight that the IMC Chamber of Commerce and Industry is a SEBI accredited training institution for commodity derivatives, and in that capacity, it's a unique distinction for a Chamber of Commerce, because there is no other Chamber of Commerce in India, in this country, that has been recognized by SEBI. And then we leverage this distinction by conducting scores of awareness and training programs. Now, let me straight away jump into the topic. I'm going to cover crops. As we all know,
not shared. So it's not shared yet. You'll have to stop sharing
stop
again.
Sharing and do it again. What a shame. Yeah, I forgot. Okay, all right. I need to share. Where is it? Share. Yes.
You can speak
okay?
here.
Is it visible?
No, sir. No, sir.
So what do I do?
No. You had not removed the sharing. That is why it did not.
I stopped sharing.
Yeah,
I stopped sharing.
Now share it again.
I'll share screen. I press share. Is it visible now?
No, nothing has come yet. 1 minute.
All right. So what do I do? And it says in my case, you are screen sharing.
No.
Okay, all right. Let me say
you can cover by this.
Let me try. Of course, I'll continue to speak.
Yeah.
I'll continue to speak. It's still not visible, right? Okay. All right. I'll continue to speak. Very clearly.
You can share later on. You can share.
We will share later on.
Yeah.
The southwest monsoon obviously is a very critical driver of farm output. We all know, for the Kharif season in particular, the harvest of which is going to commence very soon, paddy or rice, pulses, coarse grains like bajra and maize, oil seed like groundnut, soybean, and cotton are very, very critical crops. The Kharif output also has an impact on rural incomes and rural prosperity. For this year, for 2022, the IMD had forecast normal monsoon. But what is important is not this normal, but the spatial and temporal distribution of rainfall. Unfortunately, the spatial and temporal distribution of rainfall this year has not been smooth or has not been even. I have actually a slide, but I'm not able to show the slide, which shows that the country is divided into 36 meteorological subdivisions. As of 21st of September, that is yesterday, as many as 7 subdivisions are deficient in rainfall. Okay. And these 7 subdivisions fall in Uttar Pradesh. It is in Bihar, Jharkhand, Gangetic, West Bengal, and even Punjab has now joined this deficient rainfall that area. It's all red in color. That's quite in my view quite tragic. Then I must talk about the Kharif 22-23 production target set by the Government of India. There was an estimate of production, the first advance estimate released last night by the Government of India. And again, it's actually a table. It's actually a table which I want to show. But what a shame. Can you see this by any chance or no?
Yeah.
Please,
We are
okay,
able to see.
then let me go to the previous one. But I think we need to, I can't move that. Okay, let me go to the table. Perfect. Okay, so the target for rice production set by the Government of India is 112 million tons. Last year it was 111.7 million tons. This year we are going to be down by about 6 to 7 million tons. Okay, 7 million. In my view, again, personal view, I had made a forecast. We discussed that on the 12th of September in another webinar of the IMC, where my call was rice production will be between 101 and 104 million tons, in that range. Yesterday, the government has come up with 105 million tons. There is a very clear, 6 to 7 million tons of shortfall in rice production. Coarse grains, the target is 40.6 million tons. Last year was 35.9. This year there is a marginal improvement, and that marginal improvement comes because of bajra, pearl millet, whose acreage has gone up substantially, particularly in Rajasthan. Okay, pulses, we had forecast, in my forecast on the 12th of September, I had said it will be slightly lower than last year. While the target is 10.5 million tons of pulses in the Kharif season, last year was 8.4. The government's estimate again is unchanged from last year at 8.4. Although my belief is that it should be between 8 and 8.2, but I think no quarrel about the number which the government is given. Oil seeds, again, very, very important because we are so dependent on the world market for our import. Target set by the government is 26.9 million tons. Last year was 23.9. This year it's going to be slightly lower, according to government's own admission in the first estimate that was released last night, 23.6. Okay, and then cotton. Cotton has been very controversial, very highly volatile, both in the global market and in the Indian market. Target 37 million bales. One bale is 170 kilograms. Last year we had extended rainfall because of La Nina, the whole of October and even into early November, that impacted cotton harvest, as a result of which cotton production declined sharply to 31.2 million bales. This year there is a small recovery to 34. According to the government, it is 34.2 million bales. But our demand is going to be slightly higher. Therefore, I am expecting actually tighter supplies of cotton and elevated prices. Sugarcane, of course, 415 million tons, the target for cane production, versus last year's actual production estimated at 431.8. Government last night said sugarcane production will be 465 million tons, but with due respect to the to all the powers that be, I think this is a clear overestimate. My call would be between 400 and 420 million tons, which itself is a good crop. But I don't see that 465, primarily because UP is such a large producer of cane. UP has the largest acreage under cane, and UP has been reeling under drought-like conditions until very, very recent. Serious deficiency in rainfall. All that would have affected the already low yields in UP would have been affected further. And therefore, I think this 465 tons of cane will probably be revised down in the next round of estimate that will come in February. So this is very broadly the picture. So what is the conclusion? Rice production down, no change, no growth in pulses production, oil seed production marginally down, and certainly there is no growth. Slight improvement in cotton production, but we are looking at a weather-affected sharp decline from last year. There is an improvement, but nowhere near the target. All this would suggest that we will have tighter availability, tighter supply of key kharif crops. I think this is something which all of us have to take note.
Oh,
now, do I have a few more minutes?
yeah, another 2 minutes.
Okay, all right.
Because we are
Now,
running
what are
against
the
time.
factors impacting? We need to look at the global factors because our markets are integrated with the global market. Global economic growth, there is now a sense that that the world can get into a recession. Europe is already at the doorstep of recession. Economies are talking about the possibility that the US will get into recession either in the first quarter or second quarter of next year. Geopolitics, the threat of geopolitics and the risks that flow out of the geopolitical instabilities, including the war, ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, is something that will continue to affect crude oil prices, and crude oil prices have an impact on the cost of production of agriculture commodities in industrialized countries in terms of higher cost of synthetic fertilizer, higher cost of mechanized agriculture, etc. Monetary policy, obviously, the Fed has been raising interest rates, tightening. They are into the tightening cycle, and other countries are not lagging behind, really speaking. And therefore, monetary policy is also going to impact, which the what the Fed's action in the US is obviously going to prop the dollar up. When it props the dollar up, obviously emerging market currencies are going to be affected, and we have seen it in the past. Weather for me is again a concern, primarily because we are probably into the third year of successive La Nina activity. La Nina brings to South and Southeast Asia slightly above normal rainfall, but it has the opposite effect on South America, on the other side in the southern hemisphere. South America has already reeled under 2 years of
Mr. Chandrasekhar, can you just
all right, I'll stop here. I have no problem.
No, I'm saying you know how it is going to inflect you know the inflation in the supply
Mr.
side.
Chairman, unless I set the context, I can't only by setting the context I'll be able to say what is the impact of inflation. But I'm expecting supply disruption. I'm expecting tightening crop availability, third year of La Nina in a row. But to counter that, we have the risk of demand destruction because of recession fears, and therefore also speculative capital plays a big role. So when we look at inflation, we need to take all these into account. Personally speaking, I don't see any great relief from the current inflationary situation, and the crop harvest over October, November, December will obviously play a role. Supply pressure will mute the price rise, but in the first quarter of 23, I expect the effect of harvest will start to reduce, and again inflation will pick up. But the Rabi planting, the progress of Rabi planting, winter rains, all that will come into play that time. Therefore, I would think we have to be extraordinarily cautious and ready and vigilant in fighting inflation. That is all I need to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chandrasekhar. It's really very knowing that how it is going to impact the inflation, and according to you, there is a tightening, and the people has to be a little careful while spending money, because the spending is. But how the poor is going to get impacted? Poor is going to get impacted a little more out of this.
Oh, obviously, as the president said, poor are hurt the most because of food inflation, and therefore the government will have to continue with its welfare programs, targeted welfare programs, and make sure that that the intended beneficiaries do receive whatever deliveries that we need to make to them, maybe very highly subsidized food or free food or whatever else.
But recently the government of India has said they are going to withdraw the free food to the, the poor people from September.
Correct.
End of September. So what will happen?
No, there is no choice for the government of India, because the granaries which were overflowing until recently are all the stock, the inventory level is declining. Wheat crop, which was estimated first as 111 million tons, is down to close to 100 million tons. Your procurement has declined by 50%. Now, same thing will likely happen in case of rice. There are restrictions on rice export. The only saving grace, in my view, is NAFED is holding about 2.5 million tons of pulses that can possibly go for free distribution. But even there, I think the government will hesitate. They may sell it at a highly subsidized price, but not distribute it
Free.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sensekar. Thank you a lot. Now I would request our next panelist, Mr. Sundarsan Raghunath, to dwell upon the issue of crude, which is also one of the the
Driver.
area which is primarily impacting the inflation in India. So I will request Mr. Raghunath to please take the and
thank you.
we'd like that time, you please
Yes.
a little bit.
Even otherwise, I'm very specific on numbers.
Yeah,
on numbers, don't worry.
Yeah.
What happens in India is people have to understand fundamentally that we have been import dependent for the last 25 damn years that I have been in the industry. Our domestic production of crude has not even crossed 12%. We need 248 million tons. We hardly make around 28 to 30 million tons. So you are an import dependent crude person in the world. World requires 90 odd million barrels. We require 5 million barrels. You are no player in the world crude basket at all. So don't dream of fixing a crude price or getting a crude price cheap. Those are all the gimmicks told and spoken about. Because crude, anybody aware, you are market guys, are benchmarked. The amount of paper trade in crude per day even crosses 5,400 billion barrels at times in terms of future, option, contracts, derivatives, etc. all put together. And what is the world demand? 90 million. So it has nothing to do with physical delivery. We manage to do the economics in India thanks to the tax regime of taxing over and above with cess on domestic, with duty on imported. So you will have this pressure on crude 24/7 because your domestic production is not even 1 million. You need 5 million barrels. So every day, an inflation of $1 a barrel, you're talking of 2,000, 3,000 crores up and down. So government is managing to the best. Fortunately, we are out of that subsidy, LPG, kerosene, that mindset. That's gone. That is a face saving for you. So as you see, 2010 to 15 crude was best at the most stable $64 a barrel. 15 to 20, they have hammered it, brought it around 80, 85. Now, between now and the next 2-3 years, the factors that can impact the price, one is how the three big guys, half of the people don't know, most of them don't know, that Russia is a very big producer, neck to neck with US on crude oil. Saudi has a very limited say, and China is the biggest player. I had a question from one of the audience fellow now about the GRM. The GRM, gross refining margin, is between the crude and the product, average product pricing across Singapore market, went up to $38 to $40 a barrel, came down up to -2 days back. That's because China enters, China gets out. China needs 4.5 million barrels of crude, and their producers, 4.5 million barrels, they need 14.5. So when China enters to buy 14.5 million out of that 10 million barrels a day, you don't know. Nobody knows when they come, when they get out. There is a spike both on the product and on the refining margins. So as far as we are concerned, we should be happy that we have a mechanism to protect the consumer, where we have not been able to pass on the entire benefit for economic reasons, for COVID, for blah, 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 whatever it is. So with your estimated ability to handle crude, because you cannot, crude is beyond our reach, it is off the reach, by the rich, and for the rich. We are nobody. We are just at the bottom of the table, just looking at what is happening. Anybody saying, and it is highly speculative because of the derivative and the paper trade. Saudi Arabian, Assad said something, Iraq said something, US is withdrawing, and the Russian crisis has only added fuel to the fire, because Europe has gone back on consuming heavy oil, heating oil. They have started the coal plants. So as far as crude is concerned, please expect crude to be in the wavelength of 90 plus. You can go beyond 100, but Indian government has mechanism to tax you or give relief to you.
Recently, the government of India has entered into a tie-up arrangement with Russia, where it is said, it is reported, I don't know how far it is true, that the government has saved almost 35,000 crore rupees on account of import from the Russia. And there is a mechanism going on. How it is going to work, I don't know. It is all of you has to dwell upon.
Let me add, I would totally disagree, because crude is always sold at a benchmark price. Please remember, today between Dubai and Brent, you are talking of 95, 96, whatever. And when Russia has enough takers, including China, the big buyer, including everybody, they hold a price, and Russia produces 11 million barrels a day. Buying 5 cargoes from them in 2 months, it is like giving small change to you. It doesn't impact any price. You have not gained anything. The bench price, you must have saved on the premium, which is not in dollars per barrel, it's in cents per barrel. Please.
So what is your forecast for the next 3 to 6 month period?
That is what you will expect the bandwidth to remain, depending on if Russia withdraws the war, which has been the case for the last 4 months. Everybody is watching.
Yeah.
The supplies to gas and oil flows to Europe. I don't see that happening in the next 3 months, because of whatever be the reasons. And the European countries have started switching on to coal. So crude will continue to be having supported 1995, but in the worst situation, the war escalates, because Russia also has to give the oil elsewhere. We may get the bench price. Please remember, 10 रुपए का item है, 400 रुपए का freight तो आप नहीं दोगे. To bring crude oil all the way from Russia, it is not a joke. Even if Russia gives you 5 million barrels per day, fortunately or fortunately, 50% of your 5 million barrels is contracted on term.
Okay.
You have to pick from Saudis, you have to pick from KPC, you have to pick from Iran. That is to secure our crude barrels. So whatever you are buying on the spot is hardly 10 to 15% of your monthly consumption. It's not going to save you in any way. Okay. So fortunately, or whatever it is, I look at it as a stable at 90, 95. You can expect only at 40. If entire world switches to EV, there is a big threat in the next 10 years. So setting up a refinery in India now is absolute joke, because nobody is going to know what is happening, what is going to happen to diesel, which is 50% of your crude produce.
Okay. So this is also going to impact your CAD, your current account deficit?
To some extent, because you also remember that 40 billion worth of products, you are a refining hub. You are exporting 55 million tons of diesel and petrol. Half of the people don't know, or they may be knowing. So the government matches your special duty or cess on the export of diesel and the domestic crude. So I don't see it as a big impact, because you have already allocated. You don't have to have rocket science to know the 2 big dent on your forex. Is crude 140 to 150 billion?
Yeah.
Is gold around 70 to 80 billion. Now with 540, 560 reserves, you can easily handle this. The rest is more as to do with the logistic and impact of other agri commodities on your day-to-day living.
Raghunathji, what is your suggestion to the government? What they should really do it? Because this is going to impact the overall economy of the country.
Absolutely, but I think our approach today is more of revenue, like the push on GST, more of taxing, and it is time. The only segment where you can allow growth to happen and give relief to common man is bring down the tax on jet fuel. Jet fuel, you have to treat air transport of something very, very common, unlike luxury. So jet and transportation will help in fueling all sides of activity, hotel, logistics, airfare, travel, everything.
So, Mr. Raghunath, thank you very much for your deliberation and suggestions. I hope that our economists and the government authorities will take some clue out of it and work out the strategy part so that how to fix the pricing, because it is impacting every common man also.
Absolutely.
As of today, every common man, in terms of majority of the people now started using the bicycle, the motorcycle, which is also becoming very expensive for them. So it's impacting the common man very hard.
It is unfortunate that you can't find an easy solution. Like you cannot predict any oil price, you cannot predict any easy solution. I think we are doing best to stick to the revenue generation model, irrespective of whether the common man is impacted or not.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Raghunath. Thank you very much
Thanks
for your deliberations and valuable suggestions. Now I invite Mr. Rohit Jetra to dwell upon currency impacting the inflation. And as of today, recently the Fed has already increased the dollar. Now how we are going to get impacted India economy as well as the CAD, how it is going to impact. I would request Mr. Rohit to please dealt upon and suggest way out how to control and how to work out. Though it may not be totally in our control, but some suggestion which can go to the ministry to take into account while formulating the policies and other things.
Thank you, Mr. Pradeep. Hope I'm audible.
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
okay.
Loud and clear.
Thank you. So, as Mr. Pradeep, as you said, it's actually an interesting day to have a discussion on currency, seeing what has happened in the markets today post the Fed increase of interest rates, the benchmark interest rate by 75 basis points. RBI was trying to hold the currency very, very well below the level of 80. Yesterday, it closed at about 79.97. And today it's gone depreciated all the way to 80.86 as I see on my screen. So about 90 paisa of depreciation, close to 90 paisa of depreciation, which is about 1.15% has happened today during the day. So while all of us focus on rupee depreciation versus the dollar, if you actually see this last 1 year or the last 15 to 18 months, I would say, is not the story of rupee depreciation. This is actually a story of US dollar strength. So in fact, rupee has been a far better performer versus most of the other currencies. Just to give some statistics, from 1st of January, which is calendar year, current year, the rupee has depreciated by roughly about 8.65%. But currencies like euro have depreciated by over 13%. Yen has depreciated by 19.5%. Pound sterling has depreciated by 16.5%. And the dollar index, which is basically the dollar against trade weighted, which is a trade weighted index versus a basket of currencies, has actually appreciated by about close to 12% versus this basket. So the broad point being, rupee still remains to be a relatively better performer. Yes, we get hit on account of rupee dollar movement, which I agree. That's why I actually went back today and wanted to see India's, who are the India's biggest trade partners and how is getting India impacted. So India's 10 biggest trade partners are US, where our currency has depreciated.
Yeah.
China, our currency has strengthened against China by 3% during this time. Third is UAE. Fourth is Saudi Arabia, again depreciated. Fifth is Switzerland, again depreciate. Switzerland has also strengthened against in INR. So basically CHF has strengthened. Sixth is Germany. Germany, obviously, which is euro, has depreciated. Then Hong Kong, Indonesia, South Korea, Malaysia. So the point I wanted to make that out of these currencies, if I see these top 10 trading partners, we have actually rupee has strengthened versus most except US dollar and all other countries where their currency is pegged versus the US dollar. UAE, Arabian dirham is pegged against the dollar. Saudi Arabia, Riyal is pegged against the dollar. Hong Kong dollar is also pegged. So the limited point, rupee overall is not underperforming. Yes, we are getting hit on account of even our trade balances because of the overall dollar impact. That's one aspect. Now, broad reasons, simple broad reasons why is rupee depreciating versus the US dollar. Two broad reasons I would say, among probably this is not really an exhaustive list, but one, the US interest rates are, US is fighting hard to manage their inflation, and they are increasing interest rates significantly higher than what anyone would have expected 3 months back, 6 months back, or 9 months back. This is resulting in overall dollar strength. Second, crude, the Russia-Ukraine war basically complicated the situation from a commodity perspective and crude oil perspective. And the crude oil has depreciated significantly since the time the Russia-Ukraine war started in February. And from probably an average of about $60, $65 a barrel for the last financial year, this year we could be seeing the oil prices being anywhere between $90 to $105 or $110 a barrel. So considering India is the largest import for India happens to be crude, we are badly hit. Now, what is RBI doing to manage this? So RBI has been fighting hard to control the rupee depreciation. They have actually used up reserves, foreign exchange reserves of about $90 billion on spot and $40 billion on forwards. So on spot, our reserves have come down from 640 to 550. And on forwards, our reserves have come down from 64 to 22. So they have been intervening in the markets, trying to contain the rupee depreciation. And their word is they have accumulated these dollars for basically for a rainy day. So reserves are our umbrella, and the umbrella is being used right now to protect against this deluge that is happening. That's been the RBI stance. Now, the critical thing is what happens from here on. Can RBI continue to use up these reserves, extinguish these reserves, and stop or reduce the pace of rupee depreciation? That's the dilemma RBI has, because like I said, they have used up about close to $130 billion. As of today, our reserves at $550 billion are equivalent to 8.5 months of our imports. In 2013, when we had a similar problem, our reserves were equivalent to 7 months of import cover. I personally don't think the situation is as bad as of now, because other than import cover, we also probably need to see what is our short-term, long-term debt. So what percentage of our reserves are good enough to cover that? I think the situation is far better. Having said that, I think RBI is getting conscious of the fact that at this pace, someday they will get into a situation where they will think that the reserves may be getting into some kind of an inadequate situation. So hence,
Rohit bhai, I just wanted to, recently the government of India and Reserve Bank has directed the banks to open an NRO account.
Right.
What has been the impact of that?
I'll tell you. So basically, while RBI is trying, the RBI along with the Indian government has been trying to encourage these FCNRB deposits,
yes,
but the response has not been as great.
Why?
The simple reason for that is when Dr. Raghuram Rajan had done this in 2013 September, there was significant advantage for the banks to do it. The entire swap cost for hedging the FCNRB deposits was being absorbed by Reserve Bank of India. This time, that level of incentive has not been given to the banks. So overall, the FCNRB, what we are seeing, the FCNRB flows are not as great. That's number one. Second reason is when it happened in 2013, the problem was only with, the larger problem was with India and the rupee. This time, the larger problem is actually sitting across globally. So there isn't enough of free liquidity which can come across to India.
But do you not think that because the Fed has increased the rate of now is almost above 3%, do you not feel that there will be flight of investment from India? The FBI, which has come now, they can take back because they have better arbitrage in terms of the earnings.
So, this scare has been there in the markets, but I think, frankly, if you see from a global perspective, currently India really happens to be, I mean, if I may call it, one of the best performing economies. I mean, India is growing at a GDP growth rate for this particular financial year is projected at 7.2%, which is clearly one of the highest across this thing. So that's why we've seen fair amount of FPI money coming in the month of August as well. And second reason is, to a large extent, this Fed increase, not entirely, but to a large extent, this Fed increase, Fed interest rate increase is already factored into the markets. So I'm not very scared of this thing. I think the biggest worry from an Indian perspective is if tomorrow crude oil goes to $120 a barrel. So India becomes most vulnerable to commodity shocks and crude price shock. In the current situation, if the crude oil remains $90 and below, I think probably it is among the entire globe, India is one of the stronger economies as a whole.
So what is the strategy the government of India should adopt for controlling this?
Okay. So,
it is very important.
Fair. So I'll tell you, I personally think RBI has been doing a very good job. Okay. Had RBI not intervened in the markets, today you would have seen rupee dollar at 85 versus against 81. So, I think RBI to an extent has been mitigating the volatility to ensure that there is no panic in the markets, and they have not allowed a very, very sharp depreciation of rupee. So, which is helping us to prevent or reduce the pace of inflation. Obviously, if rupee would have been closer to $85 a barrel and crude oil at 9, considering the imports, we would have imported more inflation on account of higher crude, on account of higher rupee depreciation. Yeah. So, as I see, I think RBI seems to be doing a fairly reasonable job. And like I said, the problem here is not really of as much of a rupee depreciation, but as much of a larger dollar strength across. I just want to end by saying we broadly on the currency, we broadly expect for the next 6 months, rupee to remain, let's say, in a range of 79 to 83 from here on, which is what for the H2, which is for the second half of this particular financial year. There will obviously be a stronger depreciation bias, which will be there for the currency, and rupee will have to continue to resist.
Thank you, Rohit Bhai, for your deep analysis of the current currency situation and also impacting the economy and also way forward for how we are going to deal with. Now I'll request our next panelist, Mr. Madan Sanvis, Chief Economic Advisor of International Bank of Baroda.
Yeah, thanks.
Sanvis, now we have been able to see that impact on the economy. Inflation everybody is talking about. And you being a banker from both the side, from the domestic side as well as the international side. So what is your perspective of inflation and how it is going to impact, and how to make a suggestion to the government or RBI to curtail, and particularly now we are also interest rate is being increased, your repo rate is being increased. So are we right, or RBI is, see, RBI is a regulatory authority. Naturally, everybody will say whatever RBI is doing a right thing, not an issue. But are we really, can we do something where interest rate now today, now the season, the festival season is coming now, there is huge demand is going to come about in terms of the credit demand, particularly on the retail side when the shopping is going to take place, a lot of expenses are going to, how to meet with this? Because ultimately are we not heading towards the debt trap when large number of people are using the credit card and there are default coming out? Now everybody is aware of it is coming already, it is impacting a lot. So I would like to know your, recently RBI has come out with some, the review reports. There also they have hinted some, though they are saying that it's a good economy, we are on the very good trajectory and other things. But are you really feel that something needs to be done controlling the inflation?
Okay. Now, I think we have spoken of three products or three groups of commodities which have caused inflation. And all these three groups are actually on the supply side. Okay. So when we're talking in terms of crop failure for something like rice and pulses, it's over which I think the Reserve Bank of India cannot do anything. So today, when the Reserve Bank of India is being looked upon to tackle inflation, I think as a monetary authority, what you can do is to increase the repo rate. This is what central banks all across the world are doing. And that's exactly what the RBI is doing, and that's probably in the right direction. But we should remember that when we are talking of the interest rate being increased, the way it works is that by increasing interest rates, you're making the cost of capital more expensive, you're slowing down over level of economic activity, and the demand side impulses are being influenced. But today, when you're talking of, say, a crop shortages, like what Chandrasekhar was talking about rice, you're talking in terms of pulses. I think the thing goes really to the government rather than the Reserve Bank of India. So from a policy perspective, I think we need to have a clear import policy in place. I say an import policy for pulses because normally the situation is that we live in a stage of denial. We say that, look, pulses production is still very much normal. The aggregate number is all right. But the moment things like tur and urad, we see there's a shortfall in production, the prices start increasing. After a stage of denial, we say, okay, let's go in for imports. We put in the tenders. By the time inflation has already spiked. We should remember that entire of last year, we saw pulses inflation being very high. I think because on account of a good crop, the inflation has come down now, though the prices remain as elevated as ever, you still end up paying 120, 130 rupees per kilogram of pulses. But I think if you're talking in terms of what should be done from a policy perspective, what we should recommend, yes, the government has to come in and you try and reckon your imports before the crisis comes in. Because once the crisis comes, it'll be a bit too late. By the time you resolve it, 2 months have passed, the next crop comes in, and you'll realize that everything is normal. We have seen this happening with onions also in the past. We've had this happening with tur in the past. So I think that can be a policy recommendation which we can be looking for. Yeah. The second thing is on rice. And I think, again, as what Chandrasekhar had mentioned very rightly, is that we have exhausted all our stocks of wheat on account of the free food program. We're not quite sure if the free food program is going to be extended, but in case it's extended, then we'll have a problem because we've already substituted wheat with rice. And now if I'm having less production of rice, it's quite possible that the market prices will start going up. And if the market prices go up, there'll be a problem in terms of procurement, and there can be all kinds of complications. So I think rice policy is something which the Ministry of Agriculture should be addressing. Now, I don't think I have a solution for it. Probably Chandrasekhar will be having better ideas about what exactly we should do. But we should recognize the problem that shortage of rice could actually lead to a spike in prices. It could lead to a shortage in terms of supplies available, provided the government program carries on in terms of the free food program. So that's something which the government, I think the Ministry of Agriculture should be talking regularly to the Finance Ministry to see if they're going to extend this particular program. That's how you'll be able to address that issue.
That is the reason that recently the Finance Minister has come out with the statement saying that there is a need to intervene with the monetary policy.
So monetary policy is one issue. See, let's separate the two things. I think this passing the buck saying that monetary policy says you should be looking at the government. I think as a Chamber of Commerce, we need to recommend clearly saying that, look, Ministry of Agriculture should look at pulses, you should look at rice, see what the problems could be. Let's try and preempt it before the crisis comes in, by which time it will be too late. Second, if you're looking in terms of oil, I think which has been spoken of, I think RBI has assumed that there'll be an average price of 105 per barrel. But to my mind, I think as we all know about this one, that finally the retail prices of petrol and diesel have been fixed. We cannot hope to get any kind of relief in case prices come down of crude oil. And maybe even if they go up, probably our prices will not go up. Maybe some states may be hiking certain rates, but otherwise generally we could be expecting stable prices. But we forget that the rest of the commodities rest of the fuel products are being marked to market, which means that if my ATF prices will keep going up, the prices of fertilizers will keep going up, naphtha goes up, so on and so forth. So I think the possibility of fuel inflation coming is very much high. But the government, of course, has an advantage that if these prices go up, there could be certain additional revenue which you're earning. If I couple it with the fact that the rupee goes to 81, 82, which Rohit was talking of, there is a case of saying that my customs collections may increase. And in this particular age where the government is looking to mobilize as much as revenue as possible, there could be this temptation to just sit back and let things go the way they are. So I think that's something we should keep in mind, which is in the part of the government. So the government needs to relook at the entire tax structure, calibrate in such a manner that you remain revenue neutral. Do not look to see that you're going to add to your revenue because of a certain positive development in the market, like the rupee has depreciated or crude price has gone up. I think that could be another way in which we could be able to address inflation. And as far as the RBI is concerned, I think it's almost given that we'll see the repo rate being increased closer towards the 6% rate. We're looking at 6% by December for certain. And depending upon the inflation trajectory, which we are looking today to be in the region of around 6.5 to 7% average for the year, the RBI is talking of 6.7%. And I think general consensus is that we will be closer to the 7% mark. There will be a case of saying that we'll be increasing the interest rates further, so that we'll ensure that we are moving towards a regime where there could be positive real interest rates. Today, we should know one thing, that on account of high inflation of 7%, your savings have gotten affected because consumption has kept pace, as seen by the GST collections. People are still spending, but at some point of time, we'll realize that our savings have gotten affected, which is getting reflected in terms of a current account deficit, which is increasing. So both of them are a mirror image. Investment minus savings is equal to exports minus imports. So today, if we're talking in terms of a current account deficit in the region of around 3 to 3.5%, it's also a reflection of the fact that my savings have come down, financial savings have come down, primarily on account of higher inflation. So I think there is obviously a lot of urgency to tackle it, something which is within our control. So what I'm telling the government should be doing, what the RBI is doing, I think is something which is within our control. But I think if inflation was very easy and through policy prescriptions we can bring it down to zero, I think there would be no inflation anywhere. But that's not the way in which it works. So I think we'll have to be prepared for the fact that inflation will be moving gradually towards that 6% mark. But right now we have to make sure there's no acceleration, or if there are known shocks which we know, we're able to thwart it by having appropriate policy action.
So what is your viewpoint on this, our GDP? Because we have been talking about GDP to 10 trillion economy by 2030. So we'll, with this inflation, rising inflation and rising other impacting the overall economy in terms of whether we will be able to reach to 10 trillion economy with GDP.
Okay, let's keep one thing clear, that let's really not talk of this 5 trillion economy, 10 trillion economy, because if I may use a loose term, I'll say it's total rubbish. Okay. Because we are talking of nominal GDP. If I keep having a deflator of 13.5% of GDP deflator, I can reach it in 2 or 3 years, but all of us will be unhappy because of very high inflation. So when we're talking of growth, let's try link growth along with employment. Don't link it with targets. I think it's very nice to say we're the 5th largest economy, but have I created jobs? Am I creating sustainable income, sustainable consumption, which leads to higher investment, which will lead to real GDP growth? So I think let's not get into this entire business of talking of numbers, because finally I need to back it up with real GDP growth. And while we're talking of real GDP growth, which will be above 7% this year for sure, but let's remember, if I compare it with the pre-pandemic times, it would be not more than 4.5%. And even if I'm looking at 23-24, we're looking at GDP growth more or less in the region of around 6.5%. So if my real GDP growth needs to get back to that 8 to 9%, which we had at the beginning of the 2010 to 2020 decade, I think the first few years, I think that's the kind of thing which we should look to, because that's when we get into all this business of whether jobs are being created, unemployment going up. But at the end of the day, if I create jobs, I get income, I spend, I invest more, and I think all our problems will be taken care of. And these things normally take 5 to 6 years to happen. So I think that's where the focus. I think we've had good policies coming from the government in terms of the PLI, something which will definitely accelerate. But we should remember, PLI is over 3 years. If I get the incentive, by the time I decide to invest, I will invest only in case I have enough demand. If I don't have any demand, I'm not going to invest today, how much ever the government may give. So it will be funds which will not be utilized. So it's all a case of saying that everything has to fall in place together, and it has to be done under a stable inflation environment, because the moment you see that inflationary expectations keep increasing, then people will not be investing, and we will not see the kind of growth which is required to bring about this kind of overall development.
Sir, unmute, sir.
I think Pradeep, you'll have to unmute.
Unmute, sir. Yeah, once more.
No.
I just,
Yeah.
Please.
My issue is that are we at a comfortable level in terms of the GDP, in terms of inflation, in terms of there is a lot of hardening is happening.
No, what happens is that, we keep always comparing with other nations. So I think that's what was said, that we are still the fastest growing nation in the world. Yes, that is fast, but the question is that, is this something which we're really happy about? Because as I told you, compare it with 2018-19, we see that the growth has not been that great. I talk of 13.5% growth in Q. We have done an average of 1.5% per year. So that's not actually great, but yes, we are no longer in a negative zone. We are sort of getting up. I think that's the positive news. Now, inflation is 7% right, or is 13.5% right, or is 12% right? CPI actually camouflages. We have different concepts of inflation. One is what you and I are paying, consumer price index, which is your 7%. Yeah. Overall economy is the GDP deflator, 13.5%. Producers price index, WPI, which affects manufacturing more, 12.5%. So I think with this kind of inflation, I think it's definitely not a very happy situation to be in. And I think that's one of the reasons why the RBI has been fairly aggressive when it comes to increasing rates. And I think that would be the right way to go. But I think we also need to have a situation where the government has to back off and also get into some business of cutting rates. I think increasing GST in this particular year for certain products, I think probably could have been deferred by a year. But we need to make sure that the price of commodities comes down if you want to stimulate consumption. By raising
my point is by raising the the rates, it's going to impact the borrowing side also. The cost of
we haven't seen that happening. No, it has not happened, because you'll be surprised to know that since May,
presently we have around 14%, about 14% growth in the debt side.
Yeah, so growth has been very good. No, growth in credit has been very good, and retail people are borrowing. Because today, when I buy a house, I don't buy because the rates are 10% or 8%. I know in my tenure of 20 years, when I'm paying my EMIs, the interest rates will be going up certain times. They will be coming down on certain other occasions. The cost of property is important. So I think it does not come into the way. I think when the economy is booming, we had the highest interest rates. It did not come in the way of investment. So what is more important for India today is to create jobs, create income, create consumption. That creates all the strong backward linkages to investment.
So it is not going to impact by even if increasing the rate of interest.
It will affect certain segments like the SMEs. Let's not.
I'm talking about investment. Whether it will
investments will definitely not be. But today there are no investment opportunities because we have surplus capacity. Most industries have surplus capacity. Steel doesn't have. But if we look at consumer goods, FMCG goods, they have surplus capacity. Demand is not adequate. So we need the demand to pick up. It is growing. I'd say things are happening in a positive direction. We had RBI gave 75.3% as the capacity utilization rate in March. So it's not to say that nothing is happening, but it's all happening in a gradual pace.
But then one last question.
Yeah.
Now this is going to be an election year, because now in December onwards, there are 5 states, larger states are coming for the election, and thereafter there will be general election. So do you not feel that the government and RBI both will take some action to control the inflation?
No, see, they have to do everything, and they're doing everything that's possible. But I think there is still scope on the fiscal side that to give certain benefits, because I'm quite sure that in case we brought the price of petrol and fuel back to the 90s and not kept it above 100 for so long, I think there would have been lots of collateral benefits which we would have had, because look at it, your freight rates have gone up, and once these kind of costs are passed on, they never come down again.
Yeah.
So there could have been benefits. So I think keep the elections aside. I think as a matter of prudence, we need to make sure if you're targeting inflation between 4 to 6%, it's not just the job of the RBI. RBI can do its bit on the monetary side, but I think there has to be support coming even from the government side. Similarly, I think Chandrasekhar will agree with me. You keep increasing MSPs all the time, the prices will keep going up. So we have this ridiculous situation where you're telling RBI, you increase the rates, do something on inflation, but I will start giving higher MSPs. I'm not justifying whether it's right or wrong, because you should remember that if the farmer gets more money, as a consumer, I have to pay for it. Nobody else is paying for it. But unfortunately, in India, we always want to say, I'm for the farmer, I'm for the consumer, whenever it's convenient. But I think we need to have more prudent policies on this.
I think we have seen in the last
when I don't have procurement in all the crops, why the hell am I announcing all these prices and distorting it? Benchmark prices move because of the MSPs which are announced.
Last time, last general election when was going to happen, a lot of steps was taken, it was not liked by many, but it has happened. It stays there. In spite of that, everybody has seen the results. So it's really thank you, Mr. Madan. It's really all the panelists. Thank you, all panelists. We have been really having an in-depth knowledge about how it is going to impact, how it is going to impact the inflation, how going to impact the general as a customer, as a consumer. Thank you very much, and I hope that yeah, please. With the suggestion which has been made, I think we will be able to make some suggestion to the government to take at least some steps which are warranted immediately or in the long term. Yes, Mr. Chandrasekhar, you wanted to say something?
No. From all these discussions, one thing is very clear, that monetary policy alone is ill-equipped to fight inflation. It has its own limit. There are supply side issues which have to be addressed. It is for the government of India and its policies and the implementation of those policies which will become important for the supply side issues. There are global factors over which we have very limited control. And therefore, I can't feel smug, I can't feel happy because my neighbor is poorer than I am. I have 2 loaves of bread. यार उसका पास 1.5 loaf bread है, चाहिए सबको 4 loaves. But मेरे पास 2 है, उसका पास 1.5 है. Therefore, I'm better off. I think this is not going to help because we are the world's second most populous countries. Correct. 135 crore people. 30% of the population is below the poverty line. And as the president said, inflation hurts the poor the hardest.
Yes.
And therefore, I think it is important, while as all of us have to discuss various dimensions of these issues, various points of view, it is equally important that there has to be a meeting of the mind between the Reserve Bank of India with a limited scope of monetary policy and the government of India, plus chambers of commerce like ours, playing a very, very positive and catalytic role to design a very, very positive and favorable policies.
Thank you very much, Madanji. Now, yes, sir.
One thing, if you don't mind, I'll keep
please,
one sentence. See, even in terms of fuel prices, I think there has to be a proper discussion between center and states. Center cuts excise, some states don't cut their, center cuts the excise, some of them don't cut VAT. I think there needs to be some harmony even there, but that can also help to reduce inflation.
Yeah. That is a good suggestion. I think that
the problem there is, Madanji, you raised a very valid point, is every state considers petrol and diesel as a revenue generation. Right. That is why nobody wants to bring it under GST. Only one state supported, Tamil Nadu. That is a qualified fellow. He's done his Oxford. He said, come on, I am willing to. Because I brought down my excise by 3 rupees without checking with you. Now, come on, you bring it under GST. No.
Somebody has to take have a courage to do that. No?
Exactly.
The problem is courageous people are very less.
No, tax takes precedence over other things, tax revenue. So you can.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chandrasekhar, Mr. Raghunath, Mr. Rohitji, and Madanji. This has been a really wonderful experience, my experience interacting with all of you. And there is a 5 minutes, 10 minutes time available. Some of the audience and other guests would like to ask some question among.
So there are some questions in the chat box. Mr. Moderator, if you can have a look.
There is only one question I'll find.
Yeah, chat box. There are some questions.
Yeah, a minute. I'll just read. There is one. An advanced question to the panelists speaking on the crude oil. How do you see GRM of our Indian oil companies? Do you see that the falling deeply from here to on? Do you see the crude oil to be falling to 70 by 2022? Mr. Rohit bhai?
I think I'm sure Raghu.
I already touched that when I started my speech, because I had seen it in the chat box.
Yeah.
GRM is basically China driven, impacting India.
Right.
Because our export prices are FOB Singapore based, and it has nothing, no correlation with what you price at what you price and buy the crude, because you have already contracted your crude and the monthly price of crude is average of the month. So the GRM just flows along with how much crude flows globally. India has no control over the GRM.
Okay. So next question from
One second, Mr.
What we try to do, sorry, what we try to do is we manage the mix of the barrels produced. You produce 20% gasoline, you produce 40% diesel, you manage that to manage your economics. That's how you manage your GRM.
Yes,
There is a
Chandrasekhar.
second part to the question. Do you see crude oil to fall to $70?
70, which is already answered.
Given the current situation,
No.
I don't see it happening,
Shekhar.
but there is a caveat. There is
No.
a caveat.
Please, go ahead.
What is the caveat? The caveat, what if the world were to get into a series of deep recession, which is, we can't wish it away. We can't rule it out.
Yeah,
And
but
Europe, one second, please.
yeah, sorry.
Europe is already at the threshold of recession. And there is a general consensus emerging that the US might get into recession in the first or second quarter of next year. In that event, while the risk premium has already fallen by $10 or $15, the speculative capital, which is still propping up this market, can also potentially get out. That can probably bring between $5 and $10 of relief, in my view. 70 looks a little
Difficult.
Too difficult, too far-fetched. That's my view. I think let's go.
The another question is from
Don't
Suresh
rule out-
Raman.
Don't rule out the climatic compulsions and
Yeah.
the political compulsions on crude during winter.
Agree.
If the
Agree.
winter is
There is
severe,
another
you will touch
question
100.
from Suresh Raman.
Yeah.
Ah,
What
please,
is
go
the
ahead.
impact of suddenly banning the export of rice and wheat by government of India without prior sufficient notice to the exporter, who have committed on a contract to supply?
Correct.
Mr. Chandrasekhar.
Yeah, sir, it is unfortunate. I call these knee-jerk reactions, and I'm on record. In several forums, including government forums, saying that the government of India actually lacks commercial intelligence and research capability about the dynamics and drivers of commodity markets. If they had prior knowledge and if they had advanced guidance, the government will not react in a knee-jerk fashion. And I'm actually now believing I believe now that the role of chambers of commerce like IMC, for example, we need to provide that forward guidance to the government of India on crops, on crude oil, on currencies, and whatever impacts inflation, and which is what we did. 10 days ago, on the 12th of November, we did an event and we unveiled all the crop numbers. And the government's estimate released last night very significantly matches with what we did 10 days ago.
Yeah.
And therefore, that's the forward guidance we need to give.
So there is another question
They
from
listened to you
Yeah.
and they gave us sort of a small relief, saying those guys who have opened LC or contracted
Correct.
will be exempted.
Correct.
They reacted to in a very small
Right. No, but there is a transition arrangement which the government of India has to notify. Yeah.
Okay. Next question is from Chandan Kumar. According to the World Bank, the global media inflation is at the highest level since 2008. For advanced economy, it is the highest level since 1982. This inflation surges draw its origin from the series of supply shocks, pandemic lockdown, supply chain disruption, elevated war in the Ukraine, recently by timing demand and shift of services to goods back. So according to you, what should be the approach of diagnosing the rising inflation by advanced and emerging country? Cost push or demand pull inflation? Who will like to, Mr. Madan? Mr. Madan?
No, I think the question is too long. I need to just read
Right.
it and get. I've lost track of it. Yeah.
Can I read it again?
No, I'll just read it in the
Okay,
chat
okay,
box
correct,
and then I'll.
Correct.
Okay.
No, there are two sides to this question. One is supply shocks is one side. Other side is the potential a potential demand destruction possibility. Okay, and therefore there has always been a tug of war between supply uncertainties and demand concerns, and that's what exactly is playing out.
Okay, so to add to that, I would say the way in which central banks are reacting is very clear on the demand and supply side. So today, when the Federal Reserve is increasing rates, it's primarily on account of the fact that the economy was tending to get overheated. When I say overheated, they look at the unemployment numbers. It's come to an all-time low of 3.5 or maybe even less than that. So that's when you say it's a demand-oriented inflation, which is being tackled through higher interest rates. But generally, if you look at the inflation over the last 1 year, I mean, if you look at the growth which took place last year, it was being driven more by demand-side forces, which pushed up the commodity prices. Today, we're talking of a situation because of the Ukraine war, the supply disruptions which took place. Things have moved more towards the supply side. Right. Like when you look at crude oil, it's more on account of these kind of disruptions and the equations changing significantly. So it's a combination of both of them. And when we're looking in terms of what we call monetary policy, it's more looking at it from the point of view of the demand side.
Thank you. Thank you, Madan. There is one only last question, I think. No, there are. How does the new logistic policy help the economy?
So much will depend on how it is implemented. The intentions are very good, like most policies of the government.
Yeah.
The implementation is the key.
Correct. So Milinda Mohani is around 5 years back, China had slashed its currency value to the create currency fluctuation. Will this help also India? Mr. Rohit Bhai.
So, okay. I mean, I'm not sure what is being mentioned by saying China had slashed its currency policy.
Revaluation.
Yeah, basically, yeah. See, these days, I mean, I think the world has moved to a stage where every economy or every country wants a weaker currency, because a weaker currency typically helps their exports. Having said that, I think these are slightly extraordinary times with inflation being high across most economies. And so this is a double-edged sword. A weaker currency also results in importing inflation. So I don't really see RBI kind of trying to encourage, a significant depreciation as such. I mean, I don't see that really happening in the current scenario.
Absolutely agree. Primarily, given the serious trade deficit we are facing, probably close to $200 billion.
Yeah, yes, more than actually. Yeah, we could actually see somewhere 270 to 300 billion.
Yeah, even possible. Yeah, that's right. Correct.
Sir, I think we can now close it. Our president is.
Mr. Pradeep, I have one question.
President, yes, sir.
Yeah. Yes, President.
So I have a question for Mr. Jetra. I wanted to ask you this rupee invoicing. What is is anything started on this? And if it starts, what will be the impact on the rupee? Is it going to be good for the rupee, bad for the rupee? How is it going to impact?
Yeah, so I actually think this is probably a good initiative by the Reserve Bank, whereby they have started to talk about rupee invoicing. Initially, when they first came out, our thoughts, the most market participants thought that this was more for, let's say, more being done to enable oil purchases from Russia, whereby India could, or the billing for the imported oil from Russia could happen in rupee terms, which could be a win-win for both Russia and India. So I personally feel it's a good thought, but it is very nascent. I haven't seen as of now too much really fructifying. And the very fact that the US dollar holds the status of, reserve currency, and most invoices across the world, or most trade and most commodities are denominated or billed in the US dollar. I think it's going to take some time before it really fructifies or gets into some kind of actualization.
So you think it'll be positive impact on the rupee? Like rupee will appreciate if rupee invoicing happens?
I mean, it depends. See, for example, if let's say, for instance, if the oil, if India does not need to spend their foreign currency reserves for purchasing oil, I mean, in that kind of a scenario, it definitely helps. So it really needs to be seen in what context does it kind of really fructify. As of now, it is too early to say whether it's going to benefit or otherwise.
Anand, let me add here, as far as oil is concerned, you are planning, guys, and you have already made a provision from 120 to 150 billion for the payment of oil, even your last fiscal. You have already, India has made a provision, and all this rupee impact will confine you to two smaller friendly or non-friendly states like Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. Whatever it is, I don't think it will have, maybe, and that's very small. If you see the business, maybe a billion rupee is nothing. When you talk of giving credit to Sri Lanka or supporting them, you're talking of this. Similarly with Dhaka. Other than that, with Russia giving you 5 million barrels of oil or 10 million barrels of oil, because Russia has its own customers paying them enough, if not more.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, President. Any other question from
Madan has something to say.
Madan, yeah, please.
You are good.
Somebody will have to unmute him.
Unmute, Madan.
So from there only, from the IT department.
Yeah.
Okay. What I want to tell you here, I think the important part is when we are getting into an arrangement with Russia, we are net importers from Russia.
Yes.
Rupee is not an international currency. So to the extent Russia gets rupees, they can buy things from us. But assuming the 80-20 rule exists, that 80 which they're importing actually has no use for them. And mind you, the RBI has said that you will have to invest it in government bonds. Why the hell should the Indian oil counterpart, which is producing oil in Russia, be interested in making a financial investment in India? So I believe there's talk that even with Saudi Arabia, there can be such an arrangement. So as what Rohit said, it makes a lot of sense that as far as I'm concerned, I'm able to import by paying rupees, my forex reserves are safe. But if the other guy is going to import more, then he can have a problem saying, I get lots of rupees, which is of no value to me. So until India, the rupee becomes an accepted currency like the euro or yen, I think this kind of thing will not take off.
But you remember that in the past, the India used to pay in the rupee to Russia for the import of various.
So then they were using the rupees to buy things from
India.
They were using the rupees to buy from India.
Transaction between two countries. I'm saying it is transaction between
government
two
to government
countries.
and all that works. But if you're talking of this,
Mr. Moderator, will you give me a minute?
Please,
because we have lived through those times. Late 70s, that is the former Soviet Union had huge rupee reserve with them. They used to buy oil seeds and oil cakes and oil meals from India. And what would happen? It would be invoiced in rupees. But that cargo would not go to former Soviet Union countries. It would go to a dollar area. And therefore, this was a serious FERA violation. But the former Soviet Union had to spend those Indian rupees. This was a big controversy. And I have lived through those times and I've handled these cases. For I think today it is so easy to say that Russia ko rupees de do aur humko maal tel aa jayega. We need to look at tomorrow, day after, 5 years and 10 years from now. What is Russia going to do with our rupees? Is it going to distort the trade in any way, or will it be used for any purpose that can potentially infringe on our laws, say FEMA law, for example?
Okay.
Rohit, actually, I have a question. I have a question for all of you. I think if Raghunath may be the right person to answer, I think it's interest to all of us. See, India says we have imported from Russia at 30% lower price or whatever it is. How are we paying them? If you're not paying in dollars, are we using companies like yours to?
Not at all.
No,
what we do is, as I said, they have a G2G contract for the term, for which every payment, every single rupee is equal in dollars. What Russia has done that because of the EU embargo, they are hitting back. They said out of the 10 million barrels, they need around 3 to 4 billion barrels domestic per day. They produce 10 to 11 million barrels per day. What we need is around 4 billion barrels, out of which we have contracted already 2.5 with Saudi KPC.
Others, right.
So we are paying only by rupee. What Russia must have said, okay, dated Brent is 64, pay me 62.5 for the average of the month. We are not, at the same time, please don't forget the freight cost. If I am bringing it from Middle East, my 59%, my freight cost will be 8. Here the freight cost will be 18 or 20.
Thank you, sir.
Of that. So it is a set of.
I think we have
saving.
we have reached to our time frame.
Absolutely.
And I'll request now Mr. Ajit, our Director General, to give the vote of thanks.
Thank you very much. It is my privilege to propose a vote of thanks at the end of this very interesting and highly knowledgeable session. It was indeed a very unique and insightful session, and I hope all of you have drawn take-home messages. The session was very, very informative, all thanks to our erudite panel of experts who crystal grazed the three critical markets of crude, crops, and currency, as well as other drivers of inflation, which was truly incredible. Our esteemed speakers, Mr. G. Chandrasekhar, Economic Advisor, IMC and Director, IMC ERTF, Mr. Sundaresh Raghunath, former President, Oil Division, Trafigura, India, Mr. Madan Sabnavis, Chief Economist, Bank of Baroda, Mr. Rohit Jethra, Senior Executive Vice President and Business Head, FX Consumer and Corporate Verticals, Kotak Mahindra Bank Treasury, deserve to be complimented for sharing their views on this much talked about topic. I firmly believe that all three C's are very important as they have an impact on the other three C's, cash, corporates, and our country.
Yes.
Also, a
Thank you.
special thanks to Mr. Ramnath Pradeep, founder and partner, CRRAS Capital Advisors, for moderating this panel discussion. I would like to thank all our participants. Your presence is a source of encouragement to IMC. And last but not the least, I would like to thank IMC team led by Anup for their constant support. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Ajit. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
With this, we come to the conclusion. Thank you very much, and we should, Mr. Anup, probably this recorded, and we will prepare our recommendations, suggestions, and we'll appropriately write to the respective authorities, whosoever is there in the government, to take appropriate our view from the industry point of view. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.